Hello, I'm Sally Pointer. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a nettle pudding, sometimes called a spring pudding. This is a really easy, cheap and tasty thing to make, especially when you're trying to make the most out of what's in the store cupboard and a little bit of hedge bothering. So for this nettle pudding you're going to need some very simple ingredients. You've probably got them at the back of your cupboard already. I'm using pearl barley. Now, if you're like me, there's a packet of this in the pantry at pretty much all times, and you hardly ever use it. But a spring pudding, nettle pudding, herb pudding, call it what you like, is a really good way of using it up when you're making soup, trying to make ingredients go a long way. You can also use any of the rices that go slightly sticky on cooking, quite a lot of the other grains. Really, whatever it is you use as your starch element, you want to be something that will glue itself together after long cooking. There's no real quantities. You want a couple of good handfuls, and what I like to do is just start them soaking a little bit with a drop of water while I go out and collect my other ingredients. So that can just sit while I nip out. You're also going to need a pudding cloth. This is just a square of linen in my case, but it can be piece of cotton, piece of cheesecloth, back of an old shirt, whatever it is, as long as it's clean. And it's not a bad idea to run a kettle of boiling water through pudding cloths before you use them. It just has to be big enough to tie up around your finished pudding, and a piece of string. Everything else we're going to pick outside, so off to the hedgerows for a spot of hedge bothering. Now the main ingredient in a nettle pudding is of course nettles. So these are stinging nettles. They do still sting at this time of year, but it's not too bad. You can usually just pinch the tops off, and you want lots and lots of these really nice fresh tops. So a couple of groups of leaves. Check that they're not full of little holes, which would imply somebody is living in them. You can have a few of the bigger leaves as well. We're going to find those useful. But you're going to want 2 or 3 good handfuls, I reckon, of nettles. If you've got other good wild greenery around, so things like cleavers, wild garlic, even a few things like hawthorn leaves that are just coming through, the odd lime leaf, as long as you know that they're edible and plentiful, then go ahead and pick them. Do watch out for things that shouldn't be eaten. So there's a celandine there, that wouldn't be good for you. Car going past, a few people still out and about. And the golden rule of foraging is always take far less than you actually need from a particular patch. Leave some for others, for the wildlife and for the plants. So I'm going to finish filling my colander and I'll see you back in the kitchen. So just back in from the hedge, I've got a few nice fresh hawthorn leaves there. I've got some cleavers tops, mostly nettles though, and I'm just stopping off at my patch of herbs for a few odds and ends. Of course it's early in the season, there's not that much, but a few sprigs of thyme might be nice. There's chives there, but I've also got perennial onions. A couple of the tops of those would be very nice in this. Which reminds me, I've got a patch of wild garlic around the front. I'm going to go for a few leaves of those as well. But you can be very creative. Just whatever you've got to hand, it's going to go into our spring pudding. I think that's almost there. Bit of wild garlic. See you back in the kitchen. Okay, back in the kitchen, and it's always worth giving any greenery you've picked from the hedges a really good wash. Nettles in particular, because they're quite short at this time of year, rain splash bouncing on the ground and up can mean you get slightly gritty undersides. So just give those a little wash. If you're worried about sting, even those ones could get me slightly, you can always wear gloves for this bit. And then it's optional, but you can also pour a kettle of boiling water over these. That will blanch your greenery very slightly, gives it an extra wash, but it also gives the benefit of killing off the prickles on the nettle. The stings won't be there once they've wilted slightly. So a little drizzle of hot water, give it 5 minutes, makes them a lot easier to handle. So I will just do that and then we'll assemble our pudding. So I have my barley that's been soaking for 15-20 minutes. Doesn't need a lot of soaking, it just gives it a good kick start. I've got some peppercorns which I will squash some of now while my hands are dry. You can of course use any ordinary method. I like a small saddle quern myself. Now, we like pepper, so I'm used plenty of it, but obviously suit your own family taste. Don't overdo an ingredient that you don't think you like very much. That'll do, get that out of the way. The wild garlic leaves I'm going to use to line my pudding cloth. That was scalded when I did the nettles. These are my bunching onion tops. I'm just going to cut those up very roughly. You don't want any of your greenery in pieces that are too big. I'll just move those to the side for the moment. And here are my wilted greens from the hedgerow. So you can see now there's probably 2 handfuls there. I'm not making a huge pudding. It doesn't really matter what size you go for. So I'm just going to run the knife through this just to break it down into more manageable pieces. You don't want anything sort of stringy and chewy left when you finish your pudding, so you don't need to chop thoroughly, but that will do the trick. Okay, those are my fillers. They go to one side. Pudding cloth comes onto the board. I'm going to use my garlic leaves just for a bit of prettiness in the middle. And then I'm going to start assembling. So let's try and do this so you can see what's going on. Bit of soaked barley, bit of greenery, bit of soaked barley, bit of greenery, bit of pepper. You could add things like a finely chopped onion or some leek greens. It really doesn't matter too much. Now once this is done, it's going to be cooked in stock, and it just happens that I've got a pan of soup on the go, which is perfect for my purposes. If you haven't got soup on the go, you could just use something like a stock cube in some water. I'm just going to drain off the water from that. And my final layer of barley. So we're not being too precious about this. It really is just a case of get those ingredients in there. So pull up your pudding cloth, bring all the corners together. Make sure you're not leaving any gaps for things to escape. Now you want this to be loose enough for things to be able to expand, but not so loose that they don't end up squishing together and making a really nice ball. So I usually rely on the crinkles in the pudding cloth to do the work for me. And as long as there's a bit of give there, that'll be plenty. So a good bit of string, tie that up nice and tightly. And then we're going to drop it into the soup pot. So here's my soup pot, just simmering away nicely. The soup du jour happens to be tail ends of vegetables and some bacon. To be honest, any flavour of soup will do. I've even used a stock cube and water in a pinch. Drop your pudding cloth in. Just keep an eye on it to make sure that things like the string and the cloth don't siphon liquid over the top. But now you're going to leave it in there while the soup cooks. I reckon about 2 hours will do it. And that's at a fairly steady simmer. What should happen now is that the barley will expand, the vegetables will cook, the soup will give flavour to the barley and the nettles will give flavour to the soup. And then when it's all done, we'll take it out, let it cool, and then tomorrow, and it doesn't need to stand overnight, we'll slice it and we'll fry it nice and crispy in some hot fat. So I'll see you again in a couple of hours. So it's about 2 hours later and the pudding should be done. The soup needs whizzing. Hopefully you can see that that's swollen up quite significantly. It's quite hot. I put it in a dish and give it a poke. That's pretty firm now. So this needs to cool down by itself. Then it's going to go into the fridge overnight. And when you next see me, which will be in a few seconds for you, it could be tomorrow morning for me, and I'll be slicing and refrying this for breakfast so we can see how it turns out. Good morning, and a lot has happened overnight. Yesterday we were still fairly able to move around. This morning we're only allowed out for one walk a day or something similar. So my daily foraging walks are going to become even more important to me. Anyway, moment of truth. The pudding has sat overnight. It's really nice and firm. I need to get into it now. I think I'm just going to cut the string in this instance because I can't remember what sort of knot I used. And we'll have a little look at how our puddings come out. There's always a little bit of what's going on with this. That seems to have worked all right. So one lovely ball of essentially stodge. Cheap, nutritious, tasty stodge. Now, I'm going to slice this in a second, and we're going to fry thick slices of it in fat, and that will be a really, really cheap and nutritious addition to our breakfast. And sliced open, looks like this. So you've got very, very dense grains, well flecked with all the nettles and herbs that we put into them. It is a little crumbly around the edges. That really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, this is a sort of thing you're making because you really need to pad out your other ingredients, and you're going to have to take my word for it. I know from the crumbs that it's already really tasty. I think I'd better fire that frying pan up. My slices of pudding are now frying. I've just made the mistake of turning them over a little bit too early and they've got a bit crumbly. That was silly of me. I'm frying in the fat that came out of the bacon that I'm also having. Of course, if you don't eat meat, just use whatever fat suits your particular tastes and all the rest of it. But I think it's always quite useful to use fat that's coming out of something you're going to be eating anyway. It adds extra flavour. So this is nearly done. I'm going to give them a couple more minutes. I'd like the other side to get just a little bit crispier. It really doesn't matter if they fall apart. And I think because mine's crumbling, we might be really extravagant today and stick a fried egg on top because the yolk will hold it all together. I'll try and do a picture of the finished plated breakfast in just a moment. My tummy's rumbling. And there it is. I wouldn't win at any restaurant awards for presentation, but you've got lovely, crispy, crunchy grains, lots of flavour in there from all the nettles and the herbs, lots of nutrition, and really, really cheap. I've just calculated that entire pudding probably cost about 20p to make, and there's enough for 2 or 3 good breakfasts in there. So, hope you'll try something similar. Happy hedge bothering, and I'll see you in the next video.